The human brain is one of the most astonishing creations in the universe. Within that 3-pound mass of tissue are more connections than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Imagine that for a moment. You carry around inside your head the equivalent of 10,000 galaxies worth of connections, all firing, wiring and rewiring every second of your life. It is this vast web of neurons that gives rise to everything you are: your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, and your sense of self. But how exactly does it do that? Here's the unsettling truth. The world you think you experience, the colors painted across your vision, the sounds filling your ears, even the continuous story you call me, is not the world as it really is. It is a construction, a carefully edited model built moment by moment inside your brain. This model is not designed to give you truth. It is designed to keep you alive. Think about it. Your senses flood your body with information every second, far more than you could possibly process. If you tried to handle all of it raw, you would be overwhelmed instantly. So your brain cheats. It filters, simplifies, and rewrites. It throws away almost everything, and then stitches together a version of reality that is good enough to navigate the world. What you live inside, what you call reality, is not a perfect mirror of the external world. It is a story your brain tells you, a story edited for survival, not accuracy. And the most astonishing trick of all is this: you don't notice the editing, you believe the story. The brain is not showing you the universe as it is. The brain is showing you a hallucination, one so convincing that you mistake it for reality itself. Perception, not a mirror. It often feels as though the world just pours directly into the mind. Light streams in through the eyes, sound waves funnel through the ears, sensations press against the skin, and you might assume that what you are experiencing is reality itself. But is it? The truth is startling. What you see, hear, and feel is not the world as it is. Almost from the very first moment of sensory input, your brain is transforming reality. The raw signals from the outside world are edited, reshaped, and reconstructed. And by the time you become aware of them, what you're experiencing is no longer the real thing. It is an internal version, a simulation created by your own mind. Here is how it works. Your eyes don't send pictures into the brain. Your ears don't deliver complete soundscapes. Instead, specialized neurons take physical energy, light, vibrations, heat, pressure, and translate them into electrochemical signals. These signals are then sent racing into your nervous system. Already, at this first step, the editing begins. Think about the sheer volume of data hitting your senses every moment. The photons bouncing off every object. The sound waves vibrating through the air. The subtle changes in temperature, pressure, and texture against your skin. If you were forced to process all of it, every detail, your brain would be instantly overwhelmed. Survival would be impossible. So the brain does something clever. It discards almost everything. Roughly 99% of the incoming data is thrown away before you ever become conscious of it. Only a sliver survives. And what survives is not chosen randomly. It is chosen according to what your brain thinks matters for action, for survival, for predicting the next moment. Even the signals that do survive are graded. Sensory neurons fire with varying strengths, and weaker signals often vanish into the noise. Stronger signals dominate, shaping what you believe you are perceiving. The world you experience is, therefore, an edited version of reality, a streamlined, economical construction designed to be useful rather than complete. And here's the trick. It doesn't feel like an edited version. It feels whole. It feels as if the world outside is simply flowing in, unfiltered. But that sense of completeness is itself an illusion. You don't notice what's missing because the brain doesn't tell you what it left out. So when you open your eyes and look around, remember this. You are not seeing reality directly. You are seeing a carefully shaped internal model, a hallucination, sharpened by evolution, that keeps you moving through the world safely. Reality does not pour into your head like light through a window. Reality is transformed into a story your brain tells you, and you have been living inside that story all along. They're illusions as a window. If perception is not a mirror of reality, then illusions are its cracks and seams, tiny windows into how the brain constructs the world. Illusions are fascinating because they reveal the invisible mechanisms behind perception. They show us that what we see, hear, or feel is not a direct copy of the outside world. It is a prediction, a best guess, a carefully edited story the brain tells us to make sense of sensory chaos. Take vision, for example. You might think that when you look at an object, you are seeing it as it truly is. But scientists have shown over and over again that this is not the case. Optical illusions are like experiments in plain sight. They expose the hidden shortcuts the brain takes. These shortcuts are necessary because processing every single photon and detail would require a brain far larger and slower than what evolution allowed. Instead, the brain relies on patterns, rules, and assumptions about the world. Consider the famous Adelson's checkerboard illusion. Two squares on a checkerboard appear to be different shades of gray, one lighter, one darker, but in reality, they are identical. Why does this happen? Your brain is not failing. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It considers the context, the surrounding shadows, the implied light source, and compensates automatically. This compensation allows us to perceive consistent colors under varying lighting conditions. In other words, your brain is not lying to you. It is interpreting the world in a way that is most useful for action and survival. Auditory illusions operate on the same principle. Sounds are rarely pure. They are mixed with echoes, background noise, and distortions. When the brain encounters uncertainty, it fills in the gaps with educated guesses. This is why two people listening to the same sound may hear entirely different things. The viral Yanny or Laurel audio clip demonstrates this perfectly. The clip contains both high and low frequencies. Some listeners focus on high frequencies and hear Yanny. Others focus on low frequencies and hear Laurel. The sound itself has not changed, but the brain's expectations, prior experiences, and attentional focus shape what is consciously perceived. Even more subtly, illusions remind us that perception is predictive. The brain does not passively wait for sensory input. It constantly anticipates what will happen next. This predictive mechanism explains phenomena like the motion-induced blindness illusion, where stationary objects disappear when surrounded by moving patterns. Your brain predicts motion, fills in missing information, and sometimes erases reality to maintain coherent perception. Illusions are not just curiosities. They are essential clues for understanding consciousness itself. By studying illusions, neuroscientists like Susana Martinez-Condi and Stephen Macknick can observe the brain in action, see the decision-making behind perception, and trace the invisible pathways that create our conscious experience. Every illusion is a peek behind the curtain, revealing the algorithms that transform chaotic sensory input into a stable, actionable world. Let's pause to think philosophically. If what we perceive is filtered, edited, and inferred, then what does it mean for reality itself? Illusions suggest that reality is not simply out there, waiting to be discovered. Reality, as experienced, is constructed. What your brain perceives is always shaped by context, expectation, and prediction. There is no raw, untouched world entering your senses. There is only the brain's version of it, exquisitely tuned for survival, not for truth. Even something as simple as color perception is influenced by context. The brain constantly compares light and shadow, adjusting for illumination, distance, and reflection. This is why the dress illusion, white and gold versus blue and black, could divide opinion. Identical pixels were interpreted differently because individual brains made different assumptions about the lighting conditions. Each of us is seeing a different version of the same sensory world, filtered through our own predictions, histories, and biases. Illusions, therefore, are not failures. They are windows into the hidden logic of perception. They reveal a brain that is active, intelligent, and anticipatory. They remind us that seeing is not believing. Seeing is predicting, filling in, and constructing. And this construction is continuous, seamless, and mostly invisible, except when an illusion cracks the veil. Through illusions, we begin to glimpse the profound truth. The world we experience is not the world as it exists independently. It is a model, a virtual reality created by the brain, optimized for understanding, action, and survival. And by studying these cracks in perception, we can start to understand not just how we see the world, but how consciousness itself emerges from the invisible computations of the mind. We see very little, but believe we see it all. It feels like our vision is rich, detailed, and wide, as if we are continuously aware of every part of the world around us. But in reality, we see very little. Only a tiny fraction, roughly 1% of our visual field, is processed in fine detail at any given moment. The rest, it is a blend of assumptions, memory, and predictive filling in by the brain. The retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye, captures a vast amount of data, but only a small region called the fovea sees sharply. Everything outside this tiny area is blurred, hazy, or incomplete. Yet our perception feels seamless. How does this happen? Our eyes move constantly, approximately 3 times per second, in tiny jumps called saccades. Each movement redirects the fovea to a new spot, capturing high-resolution details and feeding them to the brain. Between jumps, the world seems stable, continuous, and complete. Without these eye movements, we would need a brain 600 times larger just to process the entire visual field in high detail. Evolution solved this problem elegantly. The brain processes only what is necessary and fills in the gaps. This is why we are so confident in what we see, even though most of it is constructed. The brain stitches together fragments of information, blends in memory, and uses predictive models to create the illusion of a complete, rich world. Consider the blind spot. Each eye has an area where the optic nerve exits the retina. There are no photoreceptors in this spot, so technically, part of the visual field is invisible. Yet, you never notice a hole in your vision. Why? Because the brain fills in the blind spot using surrounding patterns and expectations. It seamlessly patches the missing area with a plausible version of reality. You are experiencing a visual world that is, in part, an educated guess. Even more astonishing is how the brain prioritizes. Visual attention acts like a spotlight, illuminating certain regions while ignoring others. The brain decides what is important to process in detail and what can be inferred. This selective processing is essential for survival. Imagine trying to notice predators, prey, or obstacles if every single pixel were treated equally. The computational load would overwhelm the system. Instead, your brain chooses, and mostly unconsciously, what to emphasize, what to ignore, and what to reconstruct. Memory also plays a key role. The brain does not simply record reality, it interprets and predicts it. When you see something familiar, your brain fills in missing details based on prior experience. Faces, objects, and environments are recognized not because every feature is perfectly captured, but because the brain predicts patterns. This predictive nature of perception explains why eyewitness testimony is often unreliable. People confidently describe details they did not actually see. The brain is creating a narrative, not a perfect recording. Our sense of rich, detailed perception is therefore an illusion. It is a triumph of efficiency and prediction. The brain synthesizes tiny, high-resolution samples with vast amounts of prior knowledge, expectation, and memory to construct what feels like a continuous, complete visual world. Philosophically, this raises profound questions. If we see so little of the actual world, how much of what we experience is reality itself, and how much is a projection of the brain? Every glance, every fixation, every blink is an act of construction. Conscious perception is not a passive reception of photons. It is an active process of prediction, sampling and stitching together fragments into a coherent whole. The dance between perception, attention, memory, and prediction is constant. Your brain is always deciding where to look next, what to emphasize, and how to fill in gaps. The result is a seamless experience, a world that feels complete and detailed. Yet it is, in reality, a continuous work of art created by neural computation, an internal model of reality, not reality itself. By understanding this, we can appreciate the extraordinary efficiency and intelligence of the brain. We can marvel at how it creates the illusion of a rich, detailed, stable world from sparse data. And we can begin to see perception not as a mirror of the world, but as a sophisticated, predictive, survival-oriented simulation. A construction that feels real because the brain is masterful at hiding its work. The dress, color as inference. Remember the internet sensation, the dress. Some people saw it as white and gold, while others saw it as blue and black. The pixels on the screen were identical for everyone, yet perception was drastically different. Why did this happen? The answer lies in the brain's interpretation of color, and how it constantly infers lighting and context rather than simply recording raw information. Color is not a direct property of light entering the eye. Instead, it is a construction of the brain. Photoreceptors in the retina, called cones, detect different wavelengths of light and send signals to the brain. But the brain doesn't simply read those signals at face value. It asks questions. What is the light source? Is it bright or dim? Is the object in shadow or direct sunlight? The brain uses context to stabilize color perception, a process called color constancy. Without this ability, the same apple would appear red in the sunlight, dull brown in shade, and perhaps even green under artificial light. Life would be confusing, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. In the case of the dress, the ambiguity of the lighting created a split in perception. Some brains assumed a warm, yellowish light, leading those observers to see the dress as blue and black. Others assumed a cooler, bluish light, making the same dress appear white and gold. Both perceptions are reasonable guesses by the brain, based on prior experience, lighting assumptions, and context. This simple garment exposed the profound complexity of visual inference. This phenomenon is not limited to humans. Different species interpret color based on survival needs. Birds can see ultraviolet light, allowing them to detect patterns invisible to us. Bees also perceive ultraviolet markings on flowers, which guide them to nectar. Dogs, on the other hand, rely less on color and more on smell to interpret the world. The brain's interpretation of color is tuned to the organism's ecological and behavioral requirements. What the dress illustrates is a key principle. The brain is a prediction machine, not a literal recorder of reality. It constantly interprets sensory data in a way that maximizes usefulness for survival. The world we see is a neural simulation, a model constructed from sensory input combined with assumptions, expectations, and prior knowledge. Color is not merely in the light. It exists in the neural processing centers of the brain. Cones send three-part codes, but the brain interprets relative differences, context, and prior experience to create the rich, stable perception of color. This is why two people can look at the same object and perceive completely different realities, yet each feels perfectly correct. The brain's construction is so seamless that we rarely notice these internal assumptions, until an unusual situation like the dress exposes them. Philosophically, this raises fascinating questions. If our perception of color is constructed, how much of our perceived reality is a reflection of the world itself, and how much is a projection of our neural interpretation? Every hue, shade, and tone is the brain's best guess at what is out there. And yet, these guesses are remarkably useful, stable, and consistent for navigating life. The brain sacrifices absolute accuracy for practical survival. Color is not truth, it is utility. By appreciating this, we gain insight into the incredible inferential power of the brain, Our perceptions of the world, even something as seemingly simple as color, are not passive recordings. They are active, predictive constructions. Each glance at an object is a computation, an interpretation, an inference. And sometimes, when conditions are unusual or ambiguous, our brain's assumptions are revealed, exposing the hidden processes behind perception. The dress is more than an internet meme. It is a window into the astonishing efficiency, flexibility, and creativity of the brain. Color, like vision itself, is not just seen. It is imagined, inferred, predicted, and constructed in real time. The brain is not a camera. It is a sophisticated artist and scientist, constantly interpreting the world to keep us alive and functioning. Auditory illusions. You hear what you expect. Vision is not the only sense where the brain actively interprets information. Hearing works in much the same predictive and inferential way. Auditory illusions demonstrate that what we hear is not always a direct reflection of the sound waves hitting our ears, but a construction of the brain, shaped by context, expectation, and prior experience. Consider two identical audio clips. On paper, they are exactly the same, yet listeners can perceive completely different sounds depending on the label or context provided beforehand. If someone is told the clip says Laurel, they are likely to hear Laurel. If they are told it says Yanni, they are likely to hear Yanni. This is not trickery. It is a window into how the brain resolves ambiguity. Our auditory system is constantly guessing, predicting, and filling in gaps. The sound entering our ears is often incomplete, noisy, or distorted. The brain interprets it based on probability, past experience, and expectation, much like a detective filling in missing clues to complete a story. The internet phenomenon, Yanni or Laurel, became a viral demonstration of this principle. The clip contains both high and low frequencies, and different listeners naturally focus on different frequency ranges. Some are tuned to the high frequencies, hearing Yanni. Others emphasize the low frequencies, hearing Laurel. The brain does not simply report the sound. It constructs a perceptual interpretation. Once the brain commits to one interpretation, it is difficult to shift without conscious effort, because perception is tightly linked to expectation. This principle extends beyond quirky internet experiments. Everyday hearing relies on the same predictive machinery. When we converse in a noisy environment, the brain fills in missing syllables or words, allowing us to understand speech even when some sounds are masked by background noise. Music perception, too, depends heavily on expectation. The brain anticipates the next note or chord and uses these predictions to shape the emotional and perceptual experience of sound. Auditory illusions reveal the active role of the brain in creating perception. It is not a passive receiver, but a sophisticated predictor, constantly constructing the most likely interpretation of incoming signals. When the sound is ambiguous, as in Yanni or Laurel, the brain chooses one interpretation over another, illustrating that perception is as much about expectation as it is about reality. Interestingly, this predictive process is adaptive. In a dangerous situation, interpreting ambiguous sounds quickly can save your life. A rustle in the bushes could be just the wind, or it could be a predator. The brain makes a rapid inference based on past experience and context, enabling faster reaction than waiting for certainty. Accuracy in perception is less important than survival. The brain prioritizes speed and utility over truth. Auditory illusions also demonstrate that different brains literally perceive the world differently. Two people can hear the same sound and experience entirely different realities, yet each is consistent within their own neural framework. The brain's assumptions and expectations are usually invisible, but they profoundly shape subjective experience. Philosophically, this underscores a profound truth. What we hear, just like what we see, is not reality itself, but the brain's best guess at what reality is likely to be. Our consciousness is an active constructor of experience, filling in gaps, predicting outcomes, and weaving a coherent narrative from incomplete and noisy inputs. Sound is not merely detected. It is interpreted, predicted, and ultimately imagined in the mind. Auditory illusions remind us that perception is always an inference. The brain does not simply record. It anticipates, interprets, and sometimes deceives us, not out of error, but out of necessity. These illusions are evidence that our sensory experience is a creative act of the mind, shaped by expectation, context, and survival-driven predictions. Prediction over accuracy. The brain is not primarily a passive recorder of reality. Neuroscientists increasingly argue that its main job is prediction rather than perfect accuracy. Perception is an active, anticipatory process. The brain is constantly guessing what will happen next, testing those guesses against incoming sensory information, and updating its internal models to minimize errors. In other words, the brain works like a predictive engine, optimized for survival rather than for precise, objective representation of the world. Imagine catching a baseball. By the time you react, the ball has already traveled several meters. If your brain waited to process every sensory input perfectly before issuing a motor command, you would almost certainly miss. Instead, your brain predicts the ball's trajectory, estimates where it will be, and coordinates your body to be in the right place at the right time. Incoming sensory data are used not to build an exact record of the ball's motion, but to fine-tune these predictions in real time. This predictive nature applies to all perception. When you walk down a familiar street, your brain anticipates the shapes of objects, the layout of the road, and even the likely motion of pedestrians. These predictions allow for fast, fluid navigation, letting you focus attention on what is novel or unexpected. The brain uses past experience to form prior mental assumptions about how the world typically behaves, and tests sensory inputs against those priors. What is consistent with expectation is processed efficiently, sometimes even unconsciously. What violates expectation draws conscious attention, triggering learning and adaptation. Illusions, once again, reveal this predictive mechanism. Many visual illusions, for example, occur because the brain applies past experience to interpret ambiguous stimuli. In auditory perception, the same is true. The brain predicts words, tones, and rhythms, filling in missing information when the sensory input is incomplete. Perception is never neutral. It is shaped by what the brain expects, sometimes at the expense of accuracy. This predictive function is deeply tied to survival. Evolution favors brains that anticipate dangers, opportunities, and patterns, even if that sometimes leads to mistakes. Misjudging a sound as a predator when it was just the wind is far less costly than failing to react to a real threat. Similarly, predicting motion or patterns that are not perfectly accurate can still allow for successful action. The brain privileges usefulness over truth. Interestingly, this predictive processing can create fascinating subjective experiences. When expectations are violated in surprising ways, a sudden loud sound, an unexpected movement, or a plot twist in a story, the brain experiences novelty and sometimes pleasure. Conversely, when expectations are confirmed, the brain experiences fluency and ease, which feel comfortable and familiar. This explains why patterns, rhythms, and anticipation play such central roles in music, art, storytelling, and social interactions. At a philosophical level, prediction over accuracy challenges our understanding of reality itself. If the brain is constantly anticipating and constructing experience, then what we perceive as the present moment is already a mental simulation, a best-guess projection informed by the past and shaped by expectation. Reality is not simply received, it is actively imagined, tested, and interpreted. The world inside your head is a predictive model, updated with sensory data, rather than a faithful mirror of what is out there. Even our sense of agency and decision-making is influenced by prediction. The brain simulates likely outcomes before actions are taken, evaluating potential consequences and adjusting behavior accordingly. Conscious thought itself may arise as a kind of high-level prediction, allowing for planning, learning, and self-reflection. Prediction is not merely a cognitive trick. It is the organizing principle of thought, perception, and action. In short, the brain prioritizes prediction over accuracy because survival depends on anticipation and response rather than perfect observation. Our perceptions are best understood as educated guesses, finely tuned by evolution and personal experience to maximize success, safety, and efficiency in a complex and uncertain world. Conscious experience is the result of this constant interplay between expectation, incoming data, and adaptive interpretation. Pain, a construct with purpose. Pain is one of the most familiar yet misunderstood experiences of human life. We tend to assume it is a straightforward reflection of physical damage. If something hurts, it must be because the body is being harmed. But neuroscience shows that pain is not a simple signal from the body to the brain. It is a construct of the brain itself, carefully crafted to serve survival. The brain receives input from sensory neurons called nociceptors, which respond to extreme heat, pressure, or chemical changes. These signals carry information about potential harm, but they are not pain itself. Pain only exists once the brain interprets these signals, weighs them against context, prior experience, and predictions, and constructs a conscious experience. This means that the same stimuli can produce very different pain experiences in different people, and even in the same person at different times. Take the thermal grill illusion as an example. When alternating warm and cold stimuli are applied to the skin, people often report a burning sensation, even though neither stimulus alone would feel painful. The brain is combining information from separate sensory channels, making a complex inference about danger, and producing the experience of pain. This demonstrates that pain is an interpretive act, not a direct measurement of physical reality. Pain is deeply adaptive. From an evolutionary perspective, it is a warning system designed to protect the body. It motivates us to withdraw from harmful situations, to rest and heal, and to learn to avoid dangers in the future. Pain teaches infants and adults alike how to navigate the world safely. Importantly, the brain can modulate pain based on context. Soldiers in battle sometimes report feeling little or no pain despite serious injury. Runners in a race can push through discomfort when motivated. Attention, expectation, and emotional state can all increase or decrease the intensity of perceived pain. Chronic pain illustrates the flip side of this system. Sometimes the brain's pain construction becomes overactive or dysregulated, creating suffering even when the original injury has healed. Understanding pain as a construct, rather than a fixed signal, has transformed medicine. Treatments can now target the brain and nervous system, not just the damaged body part. Mindfulness, cognitive therapies, and virtual reality interventions can reduce the experience of pain by altering the brain's interpretation of sensory input. Pain also has a social and psychological function. By communicating discomfort, humans signal danger, illness, or need for care to others, fostering empathy and cooperation. The subjective quality of pain, the suffering, is as important as the physical input itself. Pain shapes our behavior, attention, and even moral reasoning. It is intimately connected to consciousness. The awareness of vulnerability, the anticipation of harm, and the learning that follows all depend on the brain's construction of pain. From a philosophical perspective, pain challenges our assumptions about reality. If even such a primal, seemingly objective experience is a creation of the mind, then our conscious experience of the world is always filtered, interpreted, and reconstructed. Pain is not a flaw of the system. It is a feature, a carefully tuned mechanism that keeps life alive, adaptive, and meaningful. In short, pain is not merely a reflection of the world outside. It is a highly sophisticated construction of the brain, designed to signal danger, teach, protect, and guide behavior. The fact that the brain can generate pain even in unusual circumstances, illusions, phantom limbs, or chronic conditions, shows the active, interpretive, and anticipatory nature of consciousness itself. Pain reminds us that perception is not passive, and that our experiences are shaped by purpose, survival, and meaning. From illusions to consciousness. Illusions are more than just parlor tricks or optical curiosities. They are windows into the brain's deepest secrets, revealing the way reality is constructed, interpreted, and ultimately experienced. Every time the brain encounters incomplete, ambiguous, or conflicting information, it must make a decision. It must fill in the gaps, predict outcomes, and create a coherent experience. Consciousness, in many ways, emerges from this continuous construction. Think about visual illusions like the famous checker shadow illusion, or auditory illusions such as Yanny or Laurel. These examples show that perception is not a literal recording of the world, but an interpretation based on prior experience, context, and prediction. Consciousness can be understood as the higher-level stitching together of these interpretations. It is the brain's way of assembling a continuous narrative from fragmented sensory input. Neuroscientists study consciousness by exploring cases where perception and awareness diverge. Consider blindsight, a remarkable condition in which individuals with damage to the visual cortex report seeing nothing in a portion of their visual field. Yet, when asked to guess the direction of moving objects in that blind region, their responses are correct more often than chance. Information is clearly reaching the brain, guiding behavior, but without conscious awareness. This shows that perception can exist independently of consciousness, and that consciousness is not the input itself. It is the interpretive, integrative layer built on top of sensory processing. Consciousness is also closely tied to attention. The brain receives an overwhelming amount of information at any given moment, but only a fraction of it enters conscious awareness. Attention acts like a spotlight, highlighting certain signals and suppressing others. In children, this spotlight is wide, like a floodlight, illuminating many possibilities as they explore and learn about the world. In adults, the spotlight narrows, focusing on what is immediately important, efficiently filtering out noise. This selective amplification ensures that conscious experience is both manageable and meaningful. Experiments using sophisticated tools such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, paired with EEG reveal how consciousness emerges from complexity. When a brief electrical pulse is applied to the brain, it ripples across interconnected regions. In conscious brains, these ripples spread widely and interact in intricate patterns, whereas in unconscious states the spread is limited and disorganized. This ignition of neural activity is thought to be a signature of consciousness, showing that conscious experience arises when information is broadcast, integrated, and made globally available to multiple brain regions. Illusions, blindsight, and attentional spotlighting all demonstrate a fundamental truth. Consciousness is a construction. It is not the world itself, but a coherent, integrated interpretation of sensory inputs shaped by memory, prediction, and attention. It is the brain's best guess at reality, optimized for survival, understanding, and action. Consciousness is the bridge between raw perception and the rich internal world we inhabit, giving rise to self-awareness, intentionality, and the sense that we are inside our own minds. Philosophically, this perspective challenges our intuition that consciousness is a passive reflection of the external world. Instead, consciousness is active, interpretive, and deeply entwined with the brain's predictive machinery. The illusions that confound us, the blind spots we never notice, and the selective attention we deploy all reveal the brain as an artist and engineer, creating the experience of reality moment by moment. Understanding consciousness as a construction does not diminish its significance. It enhances it. It shows that every thought, perception, and feeling is a carefully orchestrated synthesis, a miracle of biology and computation. Through this lens, we begin to see that we are not merely observers of reality, but active participants in creating it. Consciousness is the internal stage upon which the brain's predictions, interpretations, and memories come together, and it is through consciousness that we experience the world as meaningful, rich, and continuous. Babies' brains and the spotlight of attention. The human brain is a remarkable organ, but it comes at a steep cost. In adults, the brain consumes about 20% of our total calories, despite making up only about 2% of our body weight. In toddlers, this number is even more striking. Around 60% of a 2-year-old's energy goes toward fueling their rapidly developing brain. This immense energy consumption reflects the brain's complexity and its role in shaping perception, learning, and consciousness. At birth, and during the early years of life, the brain contains an astonishing number of synapses, roughly 2 quadrillion connections. These connections allow for an incredible amount of plasticity, flexibility, and learning potential. The young brain is like a vast floodlight, illuminating a wide range of possibilities and enabling the child to explore and encode as much information as possible. Every new sound, sight, or movement triggers a cascade of neural activity, reinforcing some connections, weakening others, and laying the groundwork for future understanding. As we mature, the brain becomes more efficient through a process called synaptic pruning. Redundant or less used connections are eliminated, while frequently used pathways are strengthened. This process reduces the sheer number of synapses by about half by adulthood, transforming the brain from a sprawling, highly exploratory network into a streamlined, efficient system, optimized for survival and daily functioning. This is why adults often see the world in a narrower, more focused way compared to children. The floodlight of the young brain becomes a spotlight in the adult brain, concentrating attention on what is most relevant. Attention is not just about noticing things, it is about prioritizing. The brain receives more information than it can consciously process at any moment. Without a mechanism to filter and amplify certain signals while suppressing others, consciousness would be overwhelmed. This spotlight of attention allows adults to focus intensely on tasks, solve problems efficiently, and navigate complex social and physical environments. It is a key factor in shaping our subjective experience of reality. The developmental differences between child and adult brains also reveal something profound about consciousness. In children, the floodlight of awareness illuminates a wide array of stimuli, supporting curiosity, exploration, and rapid learning. In adults, the spotlight narrows to conserve energy, reduce cognitive load, and optimize behavior. Yet, even as the spotlight narrows, the brain retains the ability to shift it dynamically, highlighting novel or important events in our environment. This dynamic allocation of attention is central to how we perceive and interact with the world. Furthermore, the interplay between attention and consciousness demonstrates that what we are aware of is not a passive reflection of reality. Instead, awareness is actively constructed by the brain's prioritization system. In adults, consciousness might feel like a continuous, seamless stream, but it is actually composed of discrete highlights, selected from the flood of sensory input by attentional processes. For children, consciousness is richer in breadth, encompassing more possibilities and potential connections, though less focused on immediate utility. Understanding these differences also sheds light on learning, creativity, and perception. Children's brains are wired to take in more information, experiment, and form broad associative networks, which supports imagination and innovation. Adults rely more on experience, pattern recognition, and selective attention, which supports efficiency and goal-directed behavior. Both systems are adaptive. One favors exploration and plasticity, the other prioritizes precision and survival. In short, the spotlight of attention, whether broad in children or narrow in adults, shapes not only what we notice, but how we construct reality, how we experience consciousness, and how we interact with the world. Consciousness is not simply a mirror of the outside world. It is a carefully guided process, a product of evolutionary design, metabolic constraints, and adaptive strategies that have allowed humans to thrive. Through this lens, we begin to appreciate that every moment of awareness is a spotlighted miracle of energy, connectivity, and selective attention, and that our experience of reality is actively shaped by the brain's prioritization mechanisms. Neural signature, ignition, and complexity. What does conscious perception actually look like inside the brain? Neuroscientists have spent decades trying to answer this question, and the picture that emerges is fascinating and surprisingly dynamic. Consciousness does not reside in a single spot in the brain. Instead, it arises from the interplay of multiple brain regions, each contributing pieces to the larger puzzle of experience. One striking approach comes from experiments where brief visual stimuli, like words or images, are flashed at durations near the threshold of perception. Sometimes, the participant reports seeing nothing at all. Other times, the same stimulus is clearly visible. What distinguishes these moments? The difference appears to lie in a sudden ignition of distributed brain activity. When a stimulus crosses the threshold into awareness, regions such as the parietal cortex, anterior cingulate, and prefrontal cortex suddenly surge in activity. These regions begin to talk to each other, exchanging information rapidly, and broadcasting signals across the brain. This sudden, coordinated activation is referred to as neural ignition, and it is thought to be a core signature of conscious perception. It is as if the brain lights up with awareness, integrating information across specialized networks into a unified experience. But consciousness is not just about activation, it is also about complexity. The brain's activity during conscious perception is highly dynamic and nonlinear. Instead of simply switching on like a light bulb, neural networks interact in intricate patterns, creating a web of communication that is rich in structure and timing. This complexity allows the brain to combine sensory input, memory, attention, and prediction, producing the seamless experience we call consciousness. Clinical tools have helped researchers probe this phenomenon further. Techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, paired with electroencephalography, EEG, act as a window into brain complexity. A TMS pulse is like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripples it creates reveal how information spreads through the water. If the resulting electrical activity in the brain is widespread and complex, it suggests that the brain is in a conscious state. If the activity is local and simple, consciousness may be absent or reduced. These methods have profound implications. Studies have shown that 15–20% of patients who appear unresponsive at the bedside, perhaps due to injury, sedation, or coma, can still show markers of consciousness when examined with TMS and EEG. This means that consciousness can exist even when outward behavior gives no clue. It also highlights the brain's remarkable ability to integrate information and maintain awareness under challenging conditions. Neural ignition and complexity suggest that consciousness is not a static property, but a dynamic, emergent process. It arises when different regions of the brain coordinate in highly structured, yet flexible, ways. It is an ongoing dance of electrical and chemical activity, a continuously updated internal broadcast that stitches together sensory input, memories, predictions, and attentional focus into the unified experience we inhabit. Understanding the neural signature of consciousness also reinforces the idea that perception is constructive, not passive. The brain does not merely record the world like a camera. Instead, it actively selects, amplifies, and integrates information across networks. Conscious experience emerges only when these patterns reach sufficient complexity and connectivity, when ignition occurs. Without this coordinated activity, stimuli may exist, but they remain invisible to awareness. In short, consciousness can be seen as the brain's electrical symphony, a complex, coordinated ignition that turns raw signals into lived experience. It is not housed in a single neuron or a single lobe, but in the interaction, complexity, and integration across the brain. By studying ignition and complexity, scientists are beginning to map the invisible contours of awareness, bringing us closer to understanding one of the deepest mysteries of existence: how subjective experience emerges from biological machinery. Memory, unstable stories. Our sense of self, our identity, and our personal narrative depend heavily on memory. Memory is what allows us to know who we are, where we came from, and what we have experienced. It is the foundation of our autobiographical story, the tapestry of events, emotions, and relationships that define us. But here's the fascinating, unsettling truth. Memories are not fixed recordings of the past. They are dynamic, constantly reconstructed stories that can change each time we recall them. When you remember something, your brain does not pull up an unaltered snapshot. Instead, it rebuilds the memory. Neuroscientist Eric Kandel and others have shown that memory involves synaptic changes, connections between neurons that strengthen, weaken, or reorganize based on experience. Every time a memory is retrieved, it enters a labile, unstable state and must undergo a process called reconsolidation to be stored again. During this process, new information, context, or even imagination can subtly alter the memory. Think about how often you recall a story from your past, perhaps a childhood birthday, a first kiss, or a family trip. With each retelling, you may emphasize different details, forget others, or even unknowingly insert new elements. Your memory isn't lying to you on purpose. It is simply reconstructing reality in a way that makes sense for your current brain state. In other words, memory is not about objective truth. It's about usefulness, coherence, and survival. This dynamic quality of memory has been observed in both animals and humans. Early experiments in rodents demonstrated that when a memory is recalled, it becomes temporarily susceptible to modification. Humans show similar patterns. Recalling a memory can make it more vulnerable to suggestion or interference, leading to subtle changes in the narrative over time. This explains why two people who experience the same event can remember it very differently, and why even your own memories can shift over months or years. Memory is also selective. The brain prioritizes information that is relevant for survival, emotional significance, or social cohesion. Details that are mundane or redundant are often discarded. This is why you might vividly remember the exact moment a car nearly hit you, but forget the color of the walls in the room you were in. Memory is a biological storyteller, choosing what to highlight and what to ignore, constantly shaping the story of your life. The instability of memory has profound implications for our sense of self. If memories are fluid and reconstructed each time they are recalled, then the self itself is fluid. Your identity is built not on a fixed past, but on a continuously updated narrative. You are, in essence, a living story constantly edited and re-edited by your brain, shaped by experience, attention, and imagination. Reconsolidation also allows for growth and adaptation. The fact that memories can be updated means we can learn from mistakes, heal from trauma, and reshape our understanding of the past. It is both a vulnerability and a strength. A vulnerability because our recollections are imperfect, and a strength because this imperfection allows for flexibility, creativity, and resilience. In short, memory is a dance between stability and instability. It constructs the past in service of the present, guiding behavior, decision-making, and emotional life. It is the bridge between perception and identity, weaving together the threads of experience into the story of who we are, a story that is never static, never final, and always evolving. The self as story. If Section 11 taught us that memory is unstable and reconstructive, Section 12 takes us deeper. The self itself is a story. Our identity, the feeling of I, is not a fixed entity residing somewhere inside the brain. Instead, it is a narrative created by the brain, continuously woven from our perceptions, memories, expectations, and social interactions. Think about your daily life. You wake up, remember yesterday, imagine tomorrow, and act in the world. In every moment, your brain is predicting, integrating, and narrating. The you, who is thinking, feeling, and acting, is essentially a storyteller constructing a coherent plot. Without this narrative, experience would be fragmented chaos, flashes of sensation without meaning. The brain achieves this through a combination of memory, attention, and prediction. Memories provide the raw material. Attention selects what is important. Prediction fills in gaps and anticipates outcomes. Together, these mechanisms stitch together a continuous sense of self, giving the illusion of a stable identity over time. But this narrative is inherently flexible. The self can adapt, reinterpret, and rewrite itself. You may remember yourself differently today than you did 5 years ago. Perhaps past mistakes now appear less shameful, or achievements seem more significant. Your brain adjusts the story to serve current goals, beliefs, and emotional needs. The self is not a static photograph. It is a dynamic, living movie, edited moment by moment. This storytelling aspect of the self is why humans are capable of reflection, imagination, and moral reasoning. By constructing a coherent story, we can evaluate our actions, predict consequences, and consider alternative futures. We can also empathize with others by imagining their stories, understanding their motivations, and anticipating their reactions. Our social world depends on this narrative ability. Yet, recognizing the self as a story can be both liberating and unsettling. It challenges the intuition that there is an immutable me at the center of consciousness. If the self is a story, then notions of permanence, control, and certainty are partly illusions. At the same time, this insight can be empowering. If the self is a story, it can be rewritten. Patterns of thought, emotional responses, and behavioral habits can be reshaped. You can author new chapters in your own life. Philosophers, psychologists, and neuroscientists converge on this idea. The self emerges from the interplay of brain processes, social context, and memory reconstruction. It is both an illusion and a practical necessity. The illusion of a continuous self allows us to navigate the world efficiently, make long-term plans, and maintain social cohesion. Without it, experience would lack continuity, purpose, and meaning. Ultimately, the brain storytelling is a masterful survival tool. It gives rise to culture, morality, creativity, and love. Our stories allow us to connect across time with our past selves, our future selves, and other people. By understanding the self as a story, we begin to see the profound artistry of the brain. It does not merely perceive reality, it weaves existence into a narrative we call life. In short, the self is not something you have. The self is something your brain does. It is the ongoing construction of meaning, identity, and continuity. It is a story that is constantly being written, edited, and read, moment by moment, thought by thought, feeling by feeling. And in recognizing this, we gain both humility and freedom. Humility for how fragile yet intricate our sense of self is, and freedom in realizing we can participate in authoring it consciously. Survival over accuracy and why that matters. After exploring perception, illusions, memory, and the self, one key principle emerges. The brain is not built to perceive objective reality perfectly. Instead, it is built to keep you alive and functioning. Evolution did not prioritize truth for its own sake. It prioritized usefulness. Everything you experience, colors, sounds, textures, emotions, and even your sense of self is a carefully constructed model. It is a story the brain tells to help you navigate a complex, unpredictable world. You do not perceive the world as it is. You perceive it as your brain predicts it will be important for survival. Consider illusions and predictions. They demonstrate that your brain fills in gaps, edits, and even deceives itself, all in service of functionality. You see and hear the world in ways that are meaningful, not necessarily accurate. You feel pain in ways that prevent injury, even when no immediate threat exists. Memory, though unstable, allows you to learn, adapt, and construct a coherent self. Even the self itself is a narrative fiction, yet it is indispensable for decision-making and social interaction. This perspective is humbling. What you take for granted as reality, the solidity of the table, the sound of a friend's voice, the consistency of your own identity, is a miraculous act of neural computation. Your consciousness stitches together fragments of sensory input, memory traces, and predictions to produce the seamless experience you call life. Every moment of awareness is the brain performing millions of calculations per second, editing, filtering, and anticipating to create a usable version of the world. And yet, this is not just a survival mechanism. It is a source of wonder. Realizing that your thoughts, perceptions, and even your sense of self are constructed by biological processes invites awe. You are, in a sense, a universe experiencing itself through the lens of a brain shaped by evolution. The neurons firing inside your skull are not just electrical signals. They are the medium through which the cosmos perceives, predicts, and creates meaning. This understanding also has practical consequences. Knowing that your brain constructs reality allows you to intervene consciously in your own narrative. You can reshape habits, reinterpret memories, and shift perspectives. Mindfulness, meditation, creativity, and self-reflection become tools not for uncovering some objective truth, but for enhancing the quality of your constructed experience. You can design your perceptions, emotions, and attention to better align with your goals and values. Ultimately, the brain's prioritization of survival over accuracy reminds us of our fragile, yet extraordinary, place in the universe. We are not passive observers, we are active participants. Through our minds, the universe becomes aware of itself. Our perceptions, memories, and stories are not merely internal phenomena. They are the interface through which existence manifests meaning. So when you open your eyes, listen, remember, or reflect, know this: you are witnessing the miracle of biological computation made conscious. Your brain edits, predicts, and constructs tirelessly so you can act, connect, and thrive. The world you experience is not the world itself, but a curated, vibrant, survival-optimized performance. And within that performance, you are not merely a character. You are the storyteller, the observer, and the universe all at once. In short, embracing the brain's limitations and marveling at its constructions allows for humility, creativity, and wonder. Reality, perception, and the self are not fixed truths. They are living, evolving stories, and we are privileged to experience them, moment by moment, as conscious participants in a universe that has learned to know itself through us.